The LA Kings struggles have forced them to make a coaching change. Eddie Garcia of Locked On Kings is here to tell us why this happened and what it means for the future of the team. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On LA Kings, Eddie Garcia. And Eddie, turbulent times right now in LA. And I guess, Todd McLellan out, Jim Hiller, now the interim coach. How did we get here? What happened?
It's a great question, Gil, and I wish I had a really good answer for you, but it is pretty much a mystery because usually when you have a team that is playing extremely well, and up until the end of December, I think the Kings were considered one of the top maybe 5 teams in the NHL, definitely top 10. And then suddenly they fell off a cliff and there was no major injury. There was no off-ice scandal. There's no real rhyme or reason for it. Now, I know that goaltender Cam Talbot, who just participated in the All-Star game, has kind of dropped off a cliff a bit. He is winless in his last 10 starts and has lost his starting job to another old veteran backup in David Riddick, who's actually come in and done fairly well. But there's no one thing you can point to say that's why. Now, earlier in the year, the Kings were having some amazing balanced scoring. They were getting goals from all 4 lines. They were not really doing much of matching up with other lines. They were just rolling out 4 and just letting them go. And everything was clicking. And then the goals just dried up suddenly. And again, without any, if somebody would have got hurt, a really key member, Anze Kopitar gets hurt, and it has kind of a domino effect on the lineup, maybe you could say that was it, but it has not happened. They have still been ridiculously healthy. It is a real mystery, and I think that's probably why they didn't make a coaching change earlier than they did. They said, well, this team was really good for the first month and a half. Let's try and have the players dig their way out of it. And it just wasn't happening. And then eventually they decided we've got to do something, and that was letting go Todd McLellan.
What is going to be different under Jim Hiller? How is his approach different from McLellan's?
That's a great question because I have been calling for a coaching change for a while now, and I like Todd McLellan both personally and as a coach. I think he's a good coach, but I feel like this team needs the shock to the system, a different voice. And I don't know that Jim Hiller is a different voice. He's been in that room. Now, the pluses are he knows the players. You would think he understands, he has a grasp of what the issues have been. But again, if he had the answers, he probably would have shared them by now, right? He wasn't holding on to them just in case I get the job and then I can turn things around. So I don't know that it's necessarily going to be drastically different. We'll see. I think the Kings are hoping that a little bit of a different voice could help. Their bye week is right out of the All-Star break, so they get an extended time off to hit the reset button. And I think the one thing that a lot of Kings fans are hoping for, and I don't think it's necessarily unrealistic, is that they are going to get back Victor Arvidsson. He's been out the entire year. It's almost like a trade deadline pickup. He's a really talented player. I don't know where he's going to slot in, maybe on the 3rd line at this point. Maybe he can help get Pierre-Luc Dubois going, which may be a question you're going to ask me. But I think him coming back when he's been out all year, and he's definitely can help on their power play, is another little thing that everyone's kind of holding on to, that can be the thing that gets him going. Again, because the confidence, I think, is still there because we've seen it. It's not like they've been struggling all year and we're hoping they can flip a switch. They were really, really good for a month and a half. And that team is still there, I would think. So it's also a confidence issue. I will say the 17 games they play where they went 3-8-6, 10 of those games were 1-goal games. 6 of them obviously were shootout or overtime. So it's not like they weren't competing. I think that was another thing why the Kings wanted to hold on to McClellan, because you never got the sense the team quit on him, right? They were still competing, but they weren't getting the timely goal, or they were having some weird thing happen to them where they allowed a bad goal. And it just kind of, that thing can snowball on a team and they lose confidence, and kind of that's where they are right now.
Any other players that you think will benefit from this coaching change in particular?
I don't know. I guess it depends on what Jim Hiller wants to do with the lineup, right? The Pierre-Luc Dubois thing he's been an enigma this year. The big offseason acquisition, one of the big trades in the offseason. And he's come in, and there are, I think, real explanations for why he hasn't been an impactful player. He's on the third line. I thought he would be on the second line. I thought he would be centering the second line. He's not. He's played with a rookie on one of his wings almost the entire year, and the other winger has been a rotating door of just guys who are role players. So he really hasn't had an Adrian Kempe or a Trevor Moore, who you may or may not know is leading the Kings in goal scoring and having a terrific year. He hasn't had a Kevin Fiala. So what's really fair to Pierre-Luc Dubois? He's not getting the minutes he usually gets, and he's not playing with top-line players. So I think there is an explanation for his lack of production. At the same time, his eye test is bad. He just has this style of play where he floats around. He doesn't really get engaged. He just kind of, it's like a Quentin Byfield, for example. Even when he was a young player who a lot of Kings fans wanted to see more from, you could never question his hustle. He was always flying all over the ice. And Pierre-Luc Dubois doesn't do that. So I think there are to be fair to him, I think there are some real reasons why he hasn't put up the numbers and had the impact that a lot of people thought he would have. But it's also on him too, right? It's a combination of not being put in a great spot, but also not really showing any kind of passion or desire. And you can make the argument he's got his money, 8 years, $8 million, and now he's happy. So if Jim Hiller can do something with him, maybe move him to the wing and get him out of center. Maybe you put Quentin Byfield from the top line wing to the third line center because he's a natural center. If he can do something like that to the lineup, then he could have an impact. And if you get Pierre-Luc Dubois going, that would be a big deal.
So what do you think the Kings do at the trade deadline? We're about a month away.
Probably not much. They're up against the cap. There is one player that is a former first-round pick who has some talent, who was in Todd McClellan's doghouse. That's Arthur Kaliev. He's been a healthy scratch for most of the last couple of weeks. He's a guy who's still young and talented. I think has some trade value. So, and it's been floated out there probably through his agent to certain members of the media that he might like a change of scenery. So that seems to be the one player who's young, has some value, who they might be able to get something in return for him. But I think the Victor Arvidsson addition is basically their big trade deadline acquisition. I know that at the beginning of the year, a lot was made of the goaltending. And as I mentioned, Cam Talbot has certainly dropped off a cliff. Do they really want to hitch their wagon to David Riddick? They could be looking to add another veteran goalie, but it's not going to be anything that's going to blow you away. It's just maybe somebody for depth, just in case. So I think the team we see, other than the addition of Victor Arvidsson, is the team we're going to see after the trade deadline.
All right. Well, it should be an interesting stretch drive in LA. Eddie, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Just make sure you check out Locked On LA Kings, because if you put in Kings, you might get a basketball team that apparently plays here in California. So Locked On LA Kings, wherever you get your podcast, on the YouTube channel as well. And if you want to follow me, you can check out Locked on, actually, it's not, that's the email address, at Eddie on Fox, EDDIEONFOX.
All right, Eddie, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
All right, thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or even 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58 between San Francisco and Kansas City, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.